Gormenghast Trilogy by Mervyn Peake. Book 1, Titus Groan. Ullage of Sunflower. For the first few moments Fuchsia had remained inert, her spirit dead to what she saw before her. As with those who on hearing of the death of their lover are numb to the agony that must later rack them, so she for those first few moments stood, incomprehensive, and stared with empty eyes. Then, indeed, was her mind split into differing passions, the paramount being agony that her secret had been discovered, her casket of wonder rifled, her soul, it seemed, thrown naked to a world that could never understand. Behind this passion lay a fear, and behind her fear was curiosity as to who the figure was, whether he was recovering or dying, how he had got there, and a long way behind the practical question of what she should do. As she stood there, it was as though within her a bonfire had been lighted. It grew until it reached the zenith of its power and died away, but undestroyable among the ashes lay the ache of a wound for which there was no balm. She moved a little nearer in a slow, suspicious way, holding the candle stiffly at arm's length. A blob of the hot wax fell across her wrist, and she started as though she had been struck. Another 2 cautious paces brought her to the side of the figure, and she bent down and peered at the tilted face. The light lay upon the large forehead and the cheekbones and throat. As she watched, her heart beating, she noticed a movement in the stretched gullet. He was alive. The melting wax was hurting her hand as it ran down the coloured side of the candle. A candlestick was kept behind the couch on a rickety shelf, and she raised herself from her stooping with the idea of finding it, and began to retreat from Steerpike. Not daring to take her eyes off him, she placed one leg behind the other with a grotesque deliberation, and so moved backwards. Before reaching the wall, however, the calf of her leg came into unexpected contact with the edge of the couch, and she sat down very suddenly upon it, as though she had been tapped behind the knees. The candle shook in her hand, and the light flickered across the face of the figure on the floor. Although it seemed to her that the head started a little at the noise she had made, she put it down to the fickle play of the light upon his features, but peered at him for a long time nevertheless to convince herself. Eventually she curled her legs under her on the couch and raised herself to her knees, and, reaching her free hand out behind her, she felt her fingers grip the shelf, and after some fumbling, close upon the iron candlestick. She forced the candle at once into one of the 3 iron arms, and, getting up, placed it on the table by her book. It had come into her mind that some effort might be made to reinvigorate the crumpled thing. She approached it again. Horrible as the thought was, that if she were the means of a recovery she would be compelled to talk to a stranger in her room. Yet the idea of him lying there indefinitely, and perhaps dying there, was even more appalling. Forgetting for a moment her fear, she knelt loudly on the floor beside him and shook him by the shoulder, her lower lip sticking out plumply and her black hair falling across her cheeks. She stopped to scrape some tallow from her fingers, and then continued shaking him. Steerpike let himself be pushed about and remained perfectly limp. He had decided to delay his recovery. Fuchsia suddenly remembered that when she had seen her Aunt Cora faint, a very long time ago, in the central hall of the East Wing, her father had ordered a servant in attendance to get a glass of water, and that when they had been unable to get the drink down the poor white creature's throat, they had thrown it in her face, and she had recovered immediately. Fuchsia looked about her to see whether she had any water in the room. Steerpike had left the jug of dandelion wine by the side of the couch, but it was out of her range of vision, and she had forgotten it. As her eyes travelled around her room, they came at last to rest upon an old vase of semi-opaque dark blue glass, which a week or so ago Fuchsia had filled with water, for she had found among the wild grass and the nettles near the moat a tall, heavy-necked sunflower with an enormous Ethiopian eye of seeds and petals as big as her hand, and as yellow as even she could wish for. But its long, rough neck had been broken, and its head hung in a dead weight of fire among the tares. She had feverishly bitten through those fibres that she could not tear apart where the neck was fractured, and had run all the way with her wounded treasure through the castle and up the flights of stairs and into her room, and then up again, around and around as she climbed the spiral staircase, and had found the dark blue glass vase and filled it with water, and then, quite exhausted, had lowered the dry, hairy neck into the depths of the vase, and, sitting upon the couch, had stared at it and said to herself aloud, "Sunflower who's broken, I found you, so drink some water up, and then you won't die. Not so quickly, anyway. If you do, I'll bury you anyway. I'll dig a long grave and bury you. Pentecost will give me a spade. If you don't die, you can stay. I'm going now," she had finished by saying, and had gone to her room below and had found her nurse, but had made no mention of her sunflower. It had died. Indeed, she had only changed the water once, and with its petals decaying it still leaned stiffly out of the blue glass vase. Directly Fuchsia saw it, she thought of the water in the vase. She had filled it to full of clear white water. That it might have evaporated never entered her head. Such things were not part of her world of knowledge. Steerpike's vision, for he would peer cunningly through his eyelashes whenever occasion favoured, was obtruded by the table, and he could not see what the Lady Fuchsia was doing. He heard her approaching and kept his eyelids together, thinking it was just about time for him to groan and begin to recover, for he was feeling cramped, when he realized that she was bending directly over him. Fuchsia had removed the sunflower and laid it on the floor, noticing at the same time an unpleasant and sickly smell. There was something pungent in it, something disgusting. Tipping the vase suddenly upside down, she was amazed to see, instead of a rush of refreshing water, a sluggish and stenching trickle of slime descend like a green soup over the upturned face of the youth. She had tipped something wet over the face of someone who was ill, and that to Fuchsia was the whole principle, so she was not surprised when she found that its cogency was immediate. Steerpike indeed had received a nasty shock. The stench of the stagnant slime filled his nostrils. He spluttered and spat the slough from his mouth, and rubbing his sleeve across his face smeared it more thinly but more evenly and completely than before. Only his dark red concentrated eyes stared out from the filthy green mask, unpolluted.